humanoid robots walking onto this stage. The missing middle. 12 founders pitching their future lives right here. And Europe's defense reboot. So coffee in your hand, eyes forward, and then let's go. But one quick thing before we dive in, and it's genuinely worth your time. At the back of the expo hall behind here, in front of the Guardian Connect area, the Deep Tech Momentum team has the DTM26 booth. 3 reasons to walk over there today. 1, you can reserve your slot at the expo floor for next year, and it's already booking up quite fast. 2, the best partnership rates you'll get all year around. And lastly, this one has clock on it. So DTM 2027 tickets are at the lowest price there will ever be. And the price ends tonight at midnight. So if these 2 days have been good for you, log in for next year before you leave. Now, to open day 2, we're starting at the foundation of every deep tech company in this room, the founding team itself. Our next speakers ask a question that should make every founder, investor, and policymaker here a little uncomfortable. What actually predicts whether a deep tech founding team will succeed? Natural science education turns out to be the foundation, but it isn't everything. So please welcome Teresa, Yannick, and Gregor, partner at High Tech Gründer Funds. Give them a hand.
Good morning, Deep Tech Momentum. It's great to see so many of you so early. My name is Teresa, and I'm super happy that I'm here together with Yannick Nolden and Gregor Heidel. And we're presenting to you this morning the first global deep tech report in a fantastic consortium. And this deep tech report is actually launched today, and you get the first insight this morning. We're giving you a glimpse at this report in the next 25 minutes. And after that, we're moving to the Catalyst room with a fantastic roundtable that is moderated by Nadine from the Handelsblatt. I'm actually falling in for Isabel, and we have Jasmine from Onsite Ventures, Koen Geurts from HTGF, Maria Danz from Proxima Fusion, and Dr. Jana Maria Weingart from Leitspalt. And actually, Koen fell in for Romy Schnelle from HTGF. And you may realize that if Romy would have been here, this would have been the first female-only deep tech panel. So, glimpse at the contents. And we're going to start with talking about deep tech startup characteristics, and then coming to the deep tech founding team characteristics, and then some statistical analysis about what predicts deep tech success. And of course, all of these analyses have important implications for founders, for investors, for educators, and also for policymakers. We're going to touch upon these points now, but you can read the full report afterwards. So why did we start with this report? There are good reports out there. Reports that talk about what is deep tech, what are deep tech ventures, theoretical pieces. There are empirical studies out there that use one data source, or interviews, for example, or studies that look at regional focus, like limited to geographical areas. And all of these reports are really good, but they have, I would say, severe limitations. And our report tries to address these by looking at worldwide, global deep tech startups and their founding teams. And we do that with a unique data set that is a combination of more than one data source, validated deep tech startups together with public LinkedIn profiles of the founders. And with this, we can make unique analysis about the founders and also the matching deep tech startups. And we couldn't have done this without our fantastic consortium that brings in very different perspectives. Partners like Arquis, who come from the legal perspective, Bayern Capital, D11Z Ventures, DTCF, HTGF, IHK, On-Site Ventures, and then a research team from TUM. What are we trying to answer with this report is what educational backgrounds and professional experience are actually very common and are present in deep tech startups. And how do these deep tech founding teams compare between, let's say, Europe, not just Germany, but Europe, to North America and to Asia? And then we run some statistical analysis seeing which deep tech founding characteristics actually correlate with deep tech success. And this is our unique data set. We started out with about 14,000 deep tech startup information and validated these 14,000 startups across 3 different databases and came to a validated data set of 5,000 deep tech startups. And then now the effort was to match these 5,000 deep tech startups with accordingly 12,000, roughly 12,000 LinkedIn profiles from the founders. So let's start with the first insight. And that was a very good insight for me, that we actually have more deep tech startups in Europe than we have in North America. That was good news to me, right? And we always look at Germany in comparison to North America, but when we look at a European perspective, we actually have more deep tech startups than North America. That's nice. But here's the bad news. When we normalize the number of startups with the startup total funding, we actually see a gap of factor 5 between Europe and North America. Also not very surprising is the deep tech startup hubs are in the US, right? They are in San Francisco, in the Valley area. No discussion about it, not a big surprise. But what is new and unique is how much the difference is between US and European startup hubs.
So let's zoom in and see what this means for Europe. And I think many of you are very deep in the deep tech scene. And Europe, I mean, is very cluster-based. So we have very, very large clusters like London, Paris, but also Berlin, the Alpine region, Munich, Zurich, Lausanne, and the Benelux regions are very, very strong in this report. And I think the obvious message here is, in the end, to found a deep tech startup, you need the infrastructure, you need excellence research, you need connection to industry, and that's actually existence in all of these European hubs. If we have a closer look at Germany, so we zoom in further, you can see that if we just look at the total funding amount in billions, Munich is leading the pack, followed by Berlin. You can also see, if you look at Munich as one of the most developed ecosystems, you have an average funding amount per startup of 40 million. So you see, deep tech is very capital intense. You need to raise a lot of money. What's very interesting here as well is that Berlin has actually a higher number of startups, but is not at the moment as good as Munich when it comes to raising the total amount of capital. It's also interesting that deep tech is really an outlier business. So you see it at Metzingen, for example. It's here in the top 10, a very small town, but Neura Robotics is very good at fundraising. I think they raised even more by now, so that's why they are in the list. Let's have a look at the exit statistics. It's just a small difference, but comparing the last 10 years, North American startups exited in 14% of the cases, and in Europe, it's 10%. What's also quite interesting for me from an investor perspective is that IPOs in the last 10 years in this data set are actually very, very rare. So there's just one IPO, and I think it's also a big opportunity and challenge for the European ecosystem to establish more IPOs. If we look at the maturity of the two ecosystems when it comes to the number of employees, it's also very interesting because you can see that in Europe, if you look at the deep tech startups that we looked at, most of them are much smaller, and just very few, just 9% actually reach sizes from 51 to 200 employees. Whereas in the US, you have almost 20% reaching that scale. And I think it was said yesterday here at the conference as well, we really have a scale-up problem, so we need to develop even larger deep tech startups here in the scene, because this clearly shows that the early stage scene is well developed, but we're not reaching the larger scaled companies. Then we also looked at the reported revenue of the deep tech startups, and it shows a very, very similar picture. I mean, on one hand, it's not easy to find in the early stages public revenue data, but actually most of the startups don't report any revenue, and they're just very, very few startups globally, so this is Europe and US together, actually reach revenues beyond 10 million. And I think here again, if we want to have more scale in deep tech, we also need more commercial thinking and more revenue in the deep tech scene. Then looking at the funding, so who is actually backing the US and the European deep tech scene, you can see slight differences. I think in North America, you have more venture capital, so 78% of the startups in the end receive venture capital. In Europe, it's just 68%, but it seems that we have a better developed ecosystem of accelerators and incubators, because here we're a bit stronger than in North America. And now next, the IP situation. This was a very, very big finding for me personally, and also the Handelsblatt this morning wrote about it, is the IP situation. So Teresa said it in the beginning, we have more deep tech startups in Europe than in the US. But if you look at the patents, the US is leading. So they have 60,000 granted or applied patents, whereas Europe, with more startups, only has 33,000. And I think this raises, and we can investigate that later in the panel session, the question, how can we use our research, our great research institutions that we have in Europe, and bring more IP and patents into deep tech startups? Because obviously, this doesn't resemble what we normally say about the strength of our research in Europe. And then a very important slide for us as investors, because we invest early on, and then we really look closely at the conversion rates. So who makes it from pre-seed to seed, from seed to A, and so forth. And we can see that in Europe, in the early stages, the conversion rates are still comparable. But when it comes to the Series B round in deep tech, in the North America, 1/4 actually raise a Series B round, and in Europe, it's just 10%. So we really have a gap between A and B round where we have larger rounds. So you can see already 63 million in the US, average round size, 46 in Europe. But we also have a gap further down the road. So if we really look at mega rounds, 260 to 330 million, there in the US, still 3% of the total startups make it there, whereas in Europe, it's just 0.4%. So at the A to B stage, but also at these later stage mega funding rounds, we really have to do something if we want to get to more European scale-ups that play on a global level.
Yeah, thank you, Gregor. And now we all know deep tech is not deep tech, yeah? So it's maybe a bit too easy to compare this. So we did a clustering, a categorization of different deep tech industries, verticals, and you can see them here. I think they're pretty common, makes sense, yeah? So we developed them with our chair of our from TUM. So I said deep tech is not deep tech, and yesterday in most of the discussions, and also we did that, yeah, we compared to the US, and I heard a lot about complaining, hey, they have too much funding, and they're too strong, and we're behind, blah, 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 yeah, and it's correct, but not for all of the deep tech industries, yeah, and I think that's a very brave statement that we want to give to you to say, hey, for AI, yeah, maybe we're behind. Also, we have some very sovereign, robust technologies in Europe. But look at all of these other deep tech verticals. For some of them, we're leading, and for all of them, the race is not over. Yeah? And I think that it's also our task for today, yesterday, to really make most of the great technology, education, and industry we have here. And I think for all of the deep tech verticals, we can be very, very brave to take the competition and make sure that we do not lose as maybe for AI. And this maybe also explains the different valuation. Yeah? So we see for North America, way higher CAGR in valuation, which is very important for investors. For European investors, I think the statement needs to be, hey, if you want to be part of the next hyperscaler, I think now is the best time to invest in European deep tech startups, because there probably the race is not that mature as for AI, and that needs to be the next S-curve, as we say it. What makes our report very unique is the mapping of the founders. Yeah? So we analyzed in depth what did they do before, education, experience, and what is the composition of the deep tech founding team. And we all know, I think that's pretty common. Deep tech is a very deep technology. You need to have a lot of education, a lot of depth in many of these technical degrees, engineering, IT, natural science. Also management is part of the top degrees here. And where do we see that? Yeah, we see it in the US, East Coast, West Coast, but also in European hubs. And what we see in Europe especially is that it's more distributed, which is a challenge, we all know, for Europe, but also a big advantage. Yeah? We have industry here, and I think what we need to do furthermore is to really leverage the acceleration of collaboration between these great institutions we have here, which we just saw is the base for deep tech. As we just said, yeah, there are two institutions standing out for prior founder education. It's MIT and Stanford. Yeah? These are really the engines for deep tech education entrepreneurship. But also in the top 15, we see some European players. And I think on one of the next slides, we're going to explain you why or what MIT and Stanford are doing differently and what we here in Europe need to also copy. And this is exactly the picture. Yeah? So what we see, and I talked to ourselves, Teresa and myself from TUM directly, but also to the Polytechnico school in France, is that we're very bad in transferring PhD students into real startup. And I think part of this answer is that right now the PhD program, and I'm also a PhD student, so my task is research and teaching. But I do not get rewarded for really startup entrepreneurship. Yeah? So it's not part of my program, and it's basically my own passion, my own motivation. But I think, and we already talked about it, we have the great education, but we will not get deep tech startups out of teaching and researching only. The third most important pillar to really enable entrepreneurship in Europe is entrepreneurship, a third pillar, which is what MIT and Stanford are doing way better. They convert like 20%, sometimes 30%. And I think in Europe it's still possible. Yeah? When we look at Oxford, when we look at Cambridge, they have a very high share of PhD students that in the end found a startup, which is, I think, next door. So I would suggest that we collaborate closer with these institutions and check what they're doing differently. Also good news, we had a look at the top 15 universities and we checked what did the founders study before. And I think for most of these really big US universities, it's very distributed across different subjects. For European players, I would suggest, for example, when we look at TUM, they're very good in engineering. When we look at Cambridge, they have a high share of natural science students. So I think it's really our task to encourage this collaboration and make sure that cross-collaboration between these education is not only within one university ecosystem, but also between. Yeah? And I think this is like one call for these big three hubs we identified. It's the Golden Triangle, Paris, and the Alpine hub, which have the most intense deep tech founder density, and which we need to further encourage to collaborate. So, very interesting point from my view is that when we look at the top 15 prior companies deep tech founders worked for, of course, we see a lot of these hyperscalers, Google, Microsoft, but we also see Nokia. Finland player, yeah, and they went through a very, very big restructuring in the last years. And I think we can all remember the competition, iPhone, Nokia, smartphone, and like the big competition there. I think it's not really a very good story for Europe. I think there we had to really step back behind the Apple player in terms of like smartphone. But what they did differently, and I think in Europe there's also a lot of competition right now. There's a lot of restructuring going on. They established a restructuring program which said, hey, you can either do an educational field, so you can continue with your study. You can, and we encourage you to give you startup grants. So we pay you additional amount of money, additional amount of loan, and we pay you the first ticket size, like the first grant. And with that, they were able to accelerate the deep tech founders from a very big pain situation, from a big restructuring, into something innovative. And I think this can be one of our also role models that we see here with German industry, which is, of course, like we have the best engineers here still. We lack a little bit of innovation, and I think this is one of the better restructuring programs we should really have when we want to really transfer our industry into the next level. Looking at the prior funding rate, yeah, US startups or North America, they have higher prior founding experience. I think that's one of the a very strong signal for success of startups. Yeah, you do not do the mistakes twice. I think it's part of like our problem that we do not really push on all of these entrepreneurship. So I'm really convinced that we can change this and we decrease the 7% delta, which is in the end a lot when we look at all of the deep tech startups. So a lot of descriptions. Now we have statistics. I promise you I will not bore you with like some very boring math and regressions and that stuff. But we synthesized all of our analysis into deep tech success. And we defined deep tech success as funding, valuation, and big exits. And when we look at all of the different characteristics we just discussed and analyzed, this is the recipe for successful deep tech startups. Of course, it's statistics and science, so maybe it's not the only truth, but it can be a very important direction and a very important guardrail for investors to check, hey, what do my team need? For founders, hey, with whom do I want to really found and with whom do I want to transfer my IP, my knowledge? And with policymakers and educators, which people do we need to meet? So the base is 2 or more founders. I think that it's pretty clear. The technical foundation of deep tech is deep tech, so it's important that all of the founders at least understand a bit of some natural science. Yeah? It doesn't need to be everyone just from one specific subject, but having at least some natural science background. And of course, the top 10 universities, that's a very big and strong signal for investors, so they will reward that. What was really surprising to me is that management experience, and when we look here, it's like 18 years. So a lot of management experience is a very important success factor, meaning that science, research, that's very, very important, that's the base. But being able to have a network to industry, being able to understand how purchasing in industries and corporates works, having also like some experiences, some seniority to convince investors and customers to make a big bold and purchase from you early on, very early startup. So management experience is very important. Engineering experience somehow, so if you have like 5 to 6 years of engineering experience, that's also a good sign, especially when you have worked in another deep tech industry. And what is a negative sign is management education, which is maybe bad for me because I'm a management PhD student. But management education is a negative sign of deep tech success, but management experience is, again, really, really important, combined with the technical education that can be a recipe, a source for very strong deep tech success. And now, Gregor, I'm really interested in what do we need to take from here.
Yeah, so we'll sum it up now before we'll start the discussion in the round table. And let's start with the founder category. So as Yannick pointed out, I think it's very important that in the founding team that everyone at least has a basic understanding of technology and its implications, and that on the other hand, you don't just need top research, but you need people with management and commercial experience. And that's often in first-time founding teams, I think there is a emphasis on formal management education, combining and complementing technical teams, but we need more experience. I think another important finding was patent filing and transferring IP is something we have to do much better compared to the US. And we also looked at the revenue charts. I think as early as possible, as a deep tech startup, it's important to provide commercial evidence and work towards revenues, because in the end, there's a famous saying, the market always wins, and that's also true for deep tech. I think when it comes to investors, I think it's also something at HGGF we are increasingly trying to focus on, so not just focusing on the technical excellence, but also on the people that can bridge between technology and the customers, that are good at product management, and that can bring also the management experience in the deep tech industries to the table. And very important, I think, for all of us as an ecosystem, we have two funding gaps compared to the US. One is from A to B rounds. There, we just see that the conversion rate is not as good. And when it comes to mega rounds, so 200 to 300 million, we simply at the moment still don't have the syndicate power to enable these rounds. But I think they're good news by the European Union on the way. So let's hope we make progress here. And now, for the educators, I'll pass on to Teresa.
Thank you. So I, as an educator, we have to fill the pipeline. We have to fill the pipeline for deep tech startups to be actually here at Deep Tech Momentum, for example. So we need to do three things. Number one, we need to integrate entrepreneurship education in technical education to present it as a viable career option. Second, we need to become better in translating PhD education into startups, into deep tech startups. And three, and I know everybody looks at me in a critical way when I say that, we need professors to also be able and allowed to start their own ventures, which is not the case at the moment. Happy to talk about that later. For policymakers, we need the politicians or policy government to co-invest, to match these large ticket sizes that are needed to scale up deep tech ventures. And the second point for policymakers is, let us focus on our structural advantage, where we still can lead the competitive race. We have lost it for novel AI, but there are technologies out there where we can still win this race. So for everyone who took out their phones for pictures, now is the time to take out your phone.
We see us in Catalyst Room, and there we will share the document. You can download it now at HTGF, TUM, whatever, all of the consortium players. It's at Handelsblatt, so we have 111 slides. Dev, you can take it for the next wine and like some good evening to really digest everything. And we continue the discussion now at Catalyst Room. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.